And welcome back. This is the last session of our segment today. Today we'll be primarily focusing on how to bring those quality events into a digital system, providing that much needed data into the day-to-day decision making that our executives crave so that we can really affect that culture of quality and bring the organization to the next level. With me today is Kim Jackson.
Hello everyone, I'm Kim Jackson. I am a product manager with MasterControl with over 10 years in experience in healthcare technology, information science, and product management. I am the product manager over our quality events products and risk, and I work closely with companies to create products that are FDA and ISO regulated. Prior to MasterControl, I worked with ADP and Ceridian and even in a hospital.
Awesome, thank you, Kim. And again, I'm Terrance Holbrook. I am the current Principal Director of Product Management at MasterControl with a short history in development of medical devices globally, as well as working in manufacturing and production environments for many years. So first we're going to talk about how do we really bring that digitization to the quality events management.
A lot of quality events management revolves around CAPAs, corrective and preventive actions. And honestly, we feel your pain. We have so many companies, so many customers that experience death by CAPA. That is, they have so many corrective actions and preventive actions and investigations going on at any given moment that they can't wrap their arms around it. Another key point is when you have corrective actions that involve suppliers or outside companies, trying to get them involved in those corrective actions so you can take the right course to mitigate risk. And then there's also all the data from your underlying quality events, your complaints, your deviations, your events, your non-conformances. What do you do with all of that data, and how do you use it to inform when a CAPA is really necessary?
Right, and really getting that information is not easy. In today's environment, most processes that involve risk mitigations, CAPA processes, SCARs, it's extremely difficult, perceived, to get this into those systems. And while it does require a change in processes, it's really not all that difficult anymore to take that information into a digital world. Kim here, of course, has experience doing that. She worked many years in the implementation side of MasterControl, specifically around our processing forms and helping customers achieve that ultimate goal of digitization. And really, to be able to do this, the company has to adopt that culture that we've been talking about of quality. It is throughout the organization. It's not an ancillary department. It's not something to think about after, right? Really, if you look at the CAPA process, let's say, in its entirety, it's all about continual improvement. You can't do continual improvement if you don't come together as a company and band around the process that's really going to get you to that next step and be able to adapt into it. And digitization, one of the biggest risks is you have to ready your processes. One of the things I always say when I'm working with companies, if you have a bad process and you digitize it, it's like adding steroids to it. So you make a really, really fast bad process, right? Where if you have a really good process, and you give it steroids, then you have a good process on steroids. So really that first step in taking that is to really sit down and look at how you as a company want to be, right? You have to look at your processes and determine where you want to take those processes, where you want that end state to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen so many companies that they have this process that they've been doing for 10, 20 years, and for them it's worked great on paper, but they don't necessarily know that it could be better because they've always done it this way. And so the very first thing you have to do is get them to think about, well, you've always done it this way because it's on paper. What could we improve upon? And then show them some best practices, tell them what other companies have done in their situations, in their same industry, and help them identify what practices they want to take going forward.
Right, exactly. We have a really good example of that. A client of ours out in St. Louis went digital with our CAPA process here at MasterControl. And they looked at their process and they looked at our standard, out of the box CAPA process, and they went through an audit with one of their largest employees, a global manufacturer. And that partner of theirs commented about how robust their CAPA system was. And they actually sat down and looked at the paper and looked at where the digital world was and decided, what, let's not try and take our process and cram it in, right? Let's start with a good practice, get it up and going, and that base starting point impressed their clients.
So let's keep talking about that for a minute. Let's keep on working with corrective and preventive actions. Some of the problems that we end up seeing is that people don't see them through to completion, even though whether or not you can ever really complete a CAPA, that's up for debate. But they never really close out those actions. They never put in place those effectiveness checks. And based on that, they never really know if they solved the problem, if it was effective or not. And on the flip side, at the start of the CAPA, does the situation really warrant a CAPA? Could you have just solved it with a simple correction or a simple change to a process without bringing a full-blown root cause investigation, preventive actions to bear, which is, time and money?
Oh, absolutely. I worked for a company. Everything was a CAPA. Didn't matter what came in. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a CAPA. Let's start a CAPA. Yeah, they had over, when I took over the quality department CAPA process, it had over 1,700 open CAPAs. They didn't know how to close it. Oh, it was terrible. They had no idea how to close it. And we had to go through and go, what does close mean? As you're saying, once you've identified a risk, it's going to be required that you monitor and maintain it. It becomes part of your process. Like you're saying, CAPA is a process. It's not a start and end. It's not a race either to the finish line. A lot of times, your first or second attempts will improve your quality process and take it to the steps, and then you will continue to refine and get better at mitigating that risk. And there's a perception in the paper world where you have to have this ending to the paper. In reality, digitization helps you get past that and realize that it is really a continuous mentality, back to that culture of quality throughout the organization. But yeah, those 1,700 CAPAs, that was a fun one to deal with.
Oh my gosh, speaking of 1,700 CAPAs, how would you even track that if it wasn't digitized? Let alone all of the actions and the rest of the projects and the deadlines that would feed into that. So with the digitization, you can track it. You can track every piece of that project, all of the deadlines, who has what, and then you can put all of those pieces together and track them as a whole. The entire CAPA, the corrections, the preventions, everything associated with it. And then, again, on the flip side, before you even go to CAPA, you should put in some controls, determine when you really, really need it. And best practice, what the FDA recommends, what ISO recommends, is using a risk-based approach, using quantitative data to determine whether you move to CAPA or you handle it at a lower level.
My wife's idea of a risk-based approach is I kind of have this regular visit to the ER for stitches, and so we just have it on speed dial. That's our approach, right? Because she just knows I'm going to get cut in whatever project I'm doing. Actually, I was very disappointed. I was playing with a dog and bone flipped up and cut my eyebrow real bad, and they just super glued it. I was so sad I didn't get stitches this year. Yeah, so I have to get them every year. So...
Oh, and then, so talking about resolving CAPAs, when we were saying they can't ever really close, that's because you could say something's been mitigated, you could say something's been improved or corrected and prevented, and then your business will change. Or a pandemic will hit and suddenly you have new factors involved in bringing that risk up again.
Right.
Yeah. So new factors can affect whether your CAPA has really been resolved or not. So there's the importance of putting in place checks so that you can continually improve and keep monitoring even those CAPAs that you've considered closed.
Right, and how do you do that on paper? right? In a
Right.
digital world, you can have the notifications, you have the bells and whistles and alarms. If you've been to Target lately and returned something, they pick it up from you with gloves on and put it in quarantine for 3 days, right? That didn't exist 4 months ago, and it'll change
No.
again, right? So
Yeah.
the whole point of a CAPA process, like you're saying, is you have to really bring those new factors in and look at it. And you can't do that when you have a stack of paper in a box somewhere or a disjointed CAPA system. If your CAPA system is documentation even in a digital system, but it's outside of the culture and that company, focus on quality where it's just quality department's problem, it's almost impossible to make that a continuous improvement motive.
Yeah, if it's disconnected from your nonconformances, from your deviations, from your reporting mechanisms, you're going to have a really hard time.
Oh, yes. Well, and one of the hardest, of course, is suppliers. Going away from CAPA, but man, supplier management, being able to do that digitally is like the ultimate dream, right? Having that supplier be able to supply their information on the digital C of A, being able to compare it to yours, making sure testing methods work. If you find issues in the field, being able to have all that data across that bridge that today is very much paper or email, on-site audits, right? How do you do that in COVID, right? With on-site audits.
Yeah.
We did a session with Aaron on that. We talked about drones. It was great. So in reality, Supplier is extremely hard to bring into it perceptionally, right? But in today's digital world, there's all kinds of products out there where we can take those steps and bring those suppliers into our digital system. And you can really start to answer that, what is the specification? How does it impact? How do we really bring that SCAR, the report cards, live time, right? We talk about dashboards and having that decision-making process for our executives. Imagine if we had live streaming data from our supply chain on their quality, on their issues. If we had an issue, how that was connected, it would be so much quicker. And in today's world, like I said, with the SaaS and being able to connect digital systems across very secure cloud systems, it's not as difficult as it once was.
Oh yeah, and being able to feed straight from the distribution center when you bring in a new material and you're doing an inspection on it before you start to do your production record run and you notice something wrong, it doesn't meet spec, all of that's connected and you can communicate immediately with the supplier. That is the dream.
Exactly. And of course, when it comes to the supplier, there's several different elements like that we were talking about connected. And we need to make sure that we can do it safely, right? We need to protect our data. And again, the data information systems that we have really provide that comfort level where there's all kinds of security around Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure clouds, and being able to redact different information and be able to really connect that supplier for what's important, because obviously we don't want to give the farm away.
Right, you don't want to open up your entire system and say, come on in, suppliers. You want to just give them the access to what they need to be given access to.
Right. So we really need a plan to be able to do that as we bring that in. And that's one of the critical steps to digitizing your processing of SCARs and CAPAs and different quality events, is you really got to look at what data do we want to have access, what data do we want to share, what do we want to look at, and being able to have that plan, that ultimate gap analysis. We need to make sure we understand the importance of every step of the process, and then taking it into the digital realm. The last step is actually not extremely difficult. It's that planning and understanding what we need to do that takes a little bit of time and it takes a little bit of effort to get right.
Yeah, but once you do have it right and you have that plan in place, even when you start to do change controls, if you have to change your manufacturing process, if you have to change the spec for a product, if you've got your suppliers dialed in and connected to you every step along the way, those change controls become like clockwork.
Oh, exactly. And how often do we have a specification at a supplier that's paper-based with a PO, and a critical change just goes through the system and it's stuck in between somewhere, right? Now you have a large corporate expense. You have parts that are going to be scrapped upon release. I've got more stories that I go through about parts coming in that we actually have to immediately go into quarantine for scrap review because we changed this part, changed that part, we have to correlate them all together. Once you take that into the digital world, all of those issues go away. And so that's your time savings and your gains, is how do you really handle that change control becomes a non-existent problem anymore. It's one of the largest problems I see in supply chain management.
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked about it a couple of times, but risk. Risk is at the heart of everything to do with quality events, especially with the direction the FDA is going with ISO. You have to do risk management throughout your entire organization. It's not just one little risk assessment to decide if you're going to CAPA or not, even though that's pretty critical. So, the problems. Defining what risk is. And that can be different depending on what it is you're evaluating. There's no one and done, one size fits all risk assessment for everything. You have to look at data from multiple sources. You have to think three-dimensionally. A lot of customers look at risk with two parameters. Usually it's frequency by impact or severity by occurrence, but they don't take into account what controls they have in place to detect those things, or what the maturity of their relationship with their supplier is, how risky that relationship is, or if they're working with a brand new company with a startup, that's going to be pretty risky. So having that third parameter in there is really critical.
But it seems so nebulous. I mean, risk in itself is inherent in everything we do, right? So how do we take and evaluate a company's risk process to take it digital, right? What are the steps we need to take? You have the FMICA, you have the different risk matrices for your different processes. And so really a digital solution for risk is actually going to have its fingers into all those different components, breaking down those silos and taking it to that level of digitization. So what do we really need to do? I mean, Kim, you've implemented, all kinds of processing forms and stuff. What is a company supposed to do to remove that nebulous aspect of risk?
Well, the first thing they should really do is look at each section of their company and bring everybody together, because like you said, risk touches everything, and it's not something that quality can take in a silo to determine what the risk is on something. You've got to look at it across all aspects of your system. And I know that most companies these days, they're doing risk assessments in spreadsheets, and they're sharing those spreadsheets around, and those spreadsheets can get changed, they can get lost, they can get shared out on the web. Who knows what's going to happen to those spreadsheets? But if you're truly digitizing it, it becomes a lot easier to share and collaborate and get an agreed upon definition of risk.
Right. So again, we have to break down those silos, right? The first step in digitizing risk is bringing together that culture of quality, bringing all the data together and going, what do we want to do to manage it, right? And defining that. And then you have to find that system that is configurable to meet your needs, right? One size doesn't always fit all, right? But configuration is key. Being able to also adapt. Systems that are not configurable can adapt, like COVID. Right? Nobody could have anticipated this was coming in. This introduced all kinds of risk to the supply chain. Cleanliness risk, employee safety risk, product risk, right? So there's all kinds of elements that came in, and if your system can't adapt and grow with your company, it's almost impossible to digitize. So that's key, is making sure that you can understand and adapt for the future in your digital system.
Yeah, and you're only as good as the data that's coming in. If you're not putting in place those digitized systems to collect the data that you need to tell you how risky something is, to use against that matrix, those definitions that you've put in place, you're dead in the water. So, defining risk before you're digitizing. You've got to know what those risks are, what you do to evaluate them, and then know that they're never going to fully go away, especially if there's a human involved. You can't get rid of humans. You can diminish the impact.
I end up at the Instacare every year.
Yeah, exactly. You are going to the Instacare every year. So what can you do to mitigate? What can you do to diminish the impact of going to the Instacare every year? You've got them on speed dial. There you go.
Exactly. So, again, to be able to digitize, you have to know where you want to be as a company. You have to really get together and understand that so you can perform that digital gap analysis. Look at where you are on paper today, look at the information that you want to gather, and look at the results you're looking for. Are you looking to mitigate your risk to a point where your manufacturing speeds up? You lower the impact to clients if something goes wrong, right? Really understand those OKRs, those goals as a company, and bring the people together and look at where you want to be in the future state and identify those steps to get there with the tools that you've chosen to go digital. Partnership is key, right? Understanding that digitization is a process and it's not a one-stop shop.
Right, again, back to the culture of continuous improvement. You can't just set it up and say, this is going to be good forever. You have to recognize that you're going to be making changes as your company changes, as the world changes, as you learn better ways of doing things. So what suits you now may not suit you in 2 years. You'll have to make sure that you have a system that can grow with you.
Exactly. And so, again, we've talked about quite a bit today, right? And a lot about how to take those steps and what to look for in a company to take that information to a more digital state where the information is readily available for your dashboards and your KPIs and your OKRs to meet that executive decision-making need. So we really want to make sure that you're comfortable knowing and how to take these steps. And we have all kinds of resources available to you. Here's just a few on this deck that you're more than welcome to reach out, as well as you can reach out to us here at MasterControl at any time. So to wrap up, digitizing won't improve poor processes, right? The key first step to taking your processes digital is to really sit down and look at your process and make sure you know where you want to be. Again, if you make a good process and digitize it, you will reap the rewards. If you make a bad process and put it into a digital system, it will only get worse. There will be Band-Aid after Band-Aid as we configure it, which leads into it needs to make sure that that system has capabilities of adapting to your business as you change and grow. Putting a one-stop in for CAPA and thinking that it's going to be exactly the same process in 10 years is kind of an interesting fallacy, because almost every audit I've been in, Kim, they recommend a change to process, right?
Yep. And speaking of changing to process, tracking and trending on your quality events and how you've responded to those quality events can tell you what you need to change about your processes to improve your organization.
Exactly. And finally, again, risk. It is somewhat nebulous, and it's our role to make it not, right? We need to, as a company, really look at how to take risk to the next level so that we can look at our process and really identify where to get those gains so we can have safe and ethical products to the market where the company is financially responsible, especially in these times with COVID. Whether it's a company that is exceeding market growth and struggling to keep up with demand, or a company that's having to tighten its belt and really look at where to save money and grow. Risk can't be controlled, but it can be monitored, tracked, and used as a tool to improve your processes. Thank you again, Kim, for joining me today, and I turn it back over to you, Jen.